All we do is see our flaws. All we do is see our struggles, our failures. Why can't I get over this? Why can't I get beyond this? Why does this bother me so much? You know, all those kinds of like defeatist statements. And why does the enemy want us to so inwardly focus? Is because if we can see ourselves as a failure because we struggle, or inadequate because we struggle, then we'll believe that's how God sees us.
Just want to take the time to welcome you folks today to Table Talk. And one of the things that we are enjoying this morning is we have a special guest, Geri Holmes, and I can tell you from experience how much she has contributed not only to our community, but really has exceptional tools in how to walk through when we're facing struggles and difficulties in life. Because I don't know about you, but mental health is a real topic that tends to really surface in really uncertain times. And I think sometimes, I don't know, Geri, that I don't think we've learned to equip ourselves how to deal with self-help. And one of the things that I'm facing, and I'm seeing, and no doubt you are facing in your profession as well, is people don't know how to cope. Not necessarily with change, but sometimes with tragedy and difficulty and circumstances that have just slid underneath our feet. And one of the purposes of having these table talks is not always necessary to provide answers for everything, but rather provide a platform in which we can communicate and talk about them. Because I know as we talk about our struggles and how we're finding victory and how we're navigating through sometimes the difficulties of our life, sometimes in these conversations is simply just tools in which maybe you hadn't thought about, but as we talk about some of these really pertinent issues, things strike a chord with you, and that's the whole purpose of Table Talk, is not necessarily to be an answer giver, although you'll find answers, absolutely you'll find answers, and sometimes it's through our own experience as we work through life that we've gained some understanding and some knowledge. And the tragedy often is if we don't provide a platform in which we can share our knowledge, because sometimes it's not so much our breakthrough, although breakthrough is important, but sometimes it's the knowledge we're gained that we can help other people in their breakthrough. And so it's an honor to have you, Geri, on this program. And again, I've said this before to our listeners, that you've really brought something, and you carry something, not only experience, but you've walked through stuff as well, and you've helped thousands of people walk through things, and sometimes it's not even complicated. I find in my own life that sometimes the answer is very simple, but sometimes hearing it and getting tools of how to just work through it is so important. So welcome again to our program, and we're going to take time. We're just going to tape and just have this discussion on mental health and just well-being and that sort of thing. So I've been looking forward to this, Geri. I really have been. We've been planning for this for
quite a while,
and it's like we had coffee the other day and says, let's do it, let's set a date, and so we did it now. So we just encourage you to sit back and relax and interact with us too. It'd be great for you to write some comments down and stuff. We would love to get back to you. We want to put your website on too if people want to further to maybe as our discussion goes and people say, hey, I would like to sit down with you, Geri. And so we'll display your website and phone numbers and that type of stuff so people can get a hold of you and have that initial contact. And we don't ever want you to feel embarrassed about anything. Help is about coming to the realization that I'm needing some extra help. And all of us at some point in our life needing help to cope and to work through, because I don't know about you, but I find, and I think all of us can relate, that there is so much shifting right now, so many things that are unsure and adjustments people are making, and I think the hardest part, and correct me if I'm wrong, Geri, I think sometimes the hardest part is to admit that we need help working through stuff. I've struggled with that in my life, thinking, well, I can't. People can't know my struggles or the garbage I'm going through because I have an image to uphold. I need to look like this strong leader. But I've found in my own life, strength is recognizing our weakness and where we can have help. And I think...
Well, Jeff, I think some of the things that's happened is we've shifted as a nation and as a community. In years past, people pulled into their community more out of sheer necessity. The pioneers, right? If the barn burned, everybody came to help building the barn.
Yeah, it was almost a culture thing.
Right, and if somebody lost a child, everybody would gather around. And I think that we've always needed people in community for support. But we're living in a very fragmented society. People don't have their family nearby or extended family. Some people are across the world from them, right? And I think that, when I look at my role, whether I have degrees behind my name is not so important to me as the fact that I think I see myself more as kind of like an older person, an elder in the community, somebody that people can come to walk alongside, right? And there are certain skills and things that I've learned through life and experience and training, but we need each other, right? We need that sense of it's okay to lean on each other.
Yes.
We're so fiercely independent in Canada, right? And we almost see it as a sign of weakness that we can't manage things ourselves. But we were never intended to manage things ourselves.
That, I think, was an eye-opener for me. And even as my wife and I have worked through our own personality struggles and obstacles we've had to go through, is I love that you made that point, because I don't think we understand it to its full potential. We're not created to be by ourselves.
No.
We're created for community. And I think even when you bring faith and God in the picture, He's designed it that way because there's things that I lack, not because I'm incomplete. It's because I'm built for others.
Right.
And when we recognize that.
Right. I find even in my own life, right? I live alone. I'm single. When I'm sitting alone in my house and I've had a lot of time to think, like what happened with COVID, everybody's work was a little less. We were all staying home more. And all I had was my thoughts and my own company. I found that it was very easy for me to begin to spiral, right? Think negative. Some of it's loneliness. Some of it's just isolation, right? And it would be crazy. I'd wake up in the morning feeling down, kind of depressed, discouraged, and all I had to do was go out of the house or connect with a friend or call for coffee, or do you know what I mean? And suddenly my whole mindset changed.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
And
I
agree.
I don't see that necessarily as a weakness. I just think we need each other.
Yeah, that's right.
And, even as a church, I think the fellowship of the church, the community that the church provides, isn't something we want to take for granted.
No.
Right? We want to see that this is part of my well-being, that I need you and you need me, and we encourage one another. Yeah.
Do we value ourselves enough to create an environment where I can succeed and be healthy?
Yeah.
Because I think there's so much going on many times in a person's life that we don't think about that. I know I haven't thought about that enough until I had crash points in my life where I either had to say I'm going nuts and I'm going crazy, or I've exhausted myself and I need help to navigate. And so that's a very important point, because I know the people listening can relate to that. Whether we want to admit it at times or not, that's just the reality.
Right.
And one of the things that I love is the aspect of being real. And I covered myself in a mask for so many years because I wanted to portray something that I want others to see, but yet inside I was winding, I was spinning, I was questioning, I was hurting, had a whole bunch of emotions to deal with.
Sure.
And yet when you're around other people, you have this persona that everything's okay, everything's wonderful. When that was a revelation for me, is even when it comes to our relationship with God, it's our realness that He sees anyway. And that He's never threatened by that. And so,
Well, I was just hearing something this week that really struck me. And that is, we know we have an enemy that exists in the world. And what's his strategy? I think right now his strategy is to attack us to the point where we become so inwardly focused that all we do is see our flaws. All we do is see our struggles, our failures. Why can't I get over this? Why can't I get beyond this? Why does this bother me so much? All those kinds of like defeatist statements. And why does the enemy want us to so inwardly focus? Is because if we can see ourselves as a failure because we struggle, or inadequate because we struggle, then we'll believe that's how God sees us too.
Absolutely.
Right? That
Absolutely.
he's ashamed of us because we should know better. We're Christians. We should have God on our side. Why are you struggling? Why? And then we withdraw from God because we feel inadequate.
Yep.
We withdraw from each other.
Absolutely.
Right? And then we try to fix it all ourselves. And that's going in the opposite direction. It's God who loves us that draws us into himself.
Yes.
And into his church, right?
Yep.
That says, come on, you can't do this without me. And I'm totally cool with you. And I totally like you in the middle of all your struggle.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
We don't have to measure up here.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times church culture in years past has portrayed the wrong message, where we are a failure, we are messed up, and God is there to clean us up. When I recognize that God doesn't see us that way,
right,
and so much of my worldview was shaped by my view of God and how he felt about me,
right,
and it was incorrect. But I shaped a worldview system based upon I'm a disappointment, I'm a frustration, I don't get things right, I always make mistakes.
Yeah.
And when that spirals and that becomes your worldview, it shapes everything you do. It shapes how you look at life, how you view things, how you see if you're going to succeed or not, all those things. And I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but then I felt like it was always an uphill battle. I could never do enough, achieve enough, or prove enough that I was worth the investment when he willingly invested and was all in right from the start.
Well, there's a subtle kind of shift in what you're saying here. And that is, we are wired as people to work.
Yeah.
We are wired to do some good in the earth,
Yeah.
right? Whether that's in our families or in our communities or even in our workplace. And God wants us to be fulfilled in all that we do. Work isn't part of being something bad. Work was given to Adam and Eve in the garden long before they even sinned. So work should be fulfilling and it should be enjoyable and we should find meaning in our work. But what happens is when we don't have an accurate view of how God sees us, we put all our work into
Absolutely.
us. We turn the camera inward. We keep pre-qualifying ourselves and say, well, I'll do something for other people, or I'll do something in the community, or I'll give in the church, or I'll do something out there when I've got myself put together.
Yeah.
And so I'm distracted by all of my mess, by all of my stuff, and I'm not actually doing what God wants me to do because he's fine with it all.
Yeah.
Like, he's totally good. You can't read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation without seeing that every single person that God used in big ways was totally messed up sooner or later.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, I was just thinking right now, Peter, who denied the Lord, what could be worse than betrayal? Like, there isn't anything worse. And he just picked it up where he left off, before the crucifixion. And he met Peter at the lakeside. He said, Peter, do you love me? Good, we got that covered. Now come on, go feed my sheep. I got something for you to do, right? And God wants us to be fulfilled, but we won't be till we get out there.
Yes.
And we start looking beyond ourselves to the needs of others, to the community at large, and we get our focus off our failures and our inadequacies and just be where we are, do what we can in the state we are.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. It's been a freeing experience for me. I'm not at the end of that, by no means, but I'm learning in that process. I've been saying something, and I say it all the time, it's synonymous already, that the process is just as important as the end result, because it's in that process where we learn and develop, where mistakes are made, where adjustments happen, and things like that. And so when I began to recognize that my time in front of me is just as important as the reward afterward. And oftentimes I think we want the applause at the end.
Right.
But we can enjoy it in the process as well too. And part of, I think, of having a healthy mind is having a right perspective of who I am, what God's created me to be, and when I struggle with that, it affects all the other areas. And so to recognize that I'm not a mess, I'm not a failure, I'm going through messy stuff, or I'm going through circumstances that are not healthy and not having good but it's in that process that I can make those adjustments and change how I see things, because how I see things always influences how I go.
Well, Jeff, I think we've kind of flipped as a society from one ditch to another. If you look at, the generation that came after the war, there was just a complete denial of emotions, right? It was just go to work, get to it, never mind how you feel, suck it up, buttercup, that whole concept. And so then we were hurt by that. We were hurt by the kind of coldness, or the lack of connection and intimacy we felt with one another, because we didn't express emotions, or they weren't expressed to us, right? And so we all want to hear I love you, we all want to hear emotional words, we all want to speak at an emotional level. Well, that's good, but I think we flipped into the other ditch, where we have become so feeling conscious. We are so aware of our anxiety, of our fear, of our worry, of our rejection, of our loneliness, insecurities, that we see it so big in our life. And we feel, because we have a strong feeling, we have to stop and we have to resolve that feeling before we can go on and do something today.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think
been there.
Part of what
absolutely
is happening even in COVID, with extra time to sit and think and process, is that we've become so preoccupied with our feelings. Now, do feelings matter? I think it's very important that we have some awareness of feelings. We're able to label them so that we can share them and so that we can be understood. But I don't think feelings were ever intended to guide us.
No.
Right?
No.
I think we are going to all feel every human emotion. I think we're going to feel anxiety. I think we're going to feel fear. I think we are going to feel rejection, loneliness, isolation, and insecurity. But we have to stop and say, okay, I feel it. What do I do with it? Not a whole lot, right? The more attention you give it, often the bigger it becomes, right? So sometimes we need to say, you know what? I am feeling anxious. I don't know what's happening in Canada right now. I don't know what's happening with North America. This worries me. It makes me anxious. Okay, now what? We put ourselves in the hand of God. We remind ourselves that God is for us, not against us, that He is ever-present help in time of trouble.
Absolutely.
We get up off the couch and we get to the business at hand. And we literally take our emotions and we mentally shelf them. They're there. They can be there. I'm not eliminating them.
No.
I'm not making them go away. Right? It's a little bit like having an experience in our life with a dog. Maybe as a child we were bit by a dog or scared by a dog. And so then we don't want to, whenever a dog is around, we right away feel that resistance and anxiety, and maybe we've gotten even to the place where, no, I can't be in the same room as this dog, right? But the truth of the matter is, we can't keep running and avoiding dogs all our life. So part of my recovery from a bad experience with a dog is to slowly expose myself to that dog and push through the feeling I'm having while the dog is in the room.
Jerry, I like that, because we don't want to push through. We allow our fears to hold us back.
Exactly.
Or we use the excuse, well, that's just not for me, so I'm just going to stay there. I like to push through. But as we
learn how to be with certain emotions, and I think all of us have had some kind of childhood experiences where an emotion was very troubling. For me, it was loneliness, right? I hated being alone as a child, and I had a lot of time to be alone, and I was very extroverted, and so that became a very painful emotion for me, And so in my life, even growing up as an adult, I wanted to do everything in my power to avoid being alone. Well, guess what? That's just not doable. So I had to learn how to feel lonely and ignore it. Like, get busy, do something, take charge, right?
It's not staying there.
Right. It's not trying to eliminate it,
No.
crush it. Oh, I can't have this feeling. I hate this feeling. No, I can be alone, and I can even be lonely.
Yeah.
Right? But even when I'm lonely, God is with me. I can get up. I can get to it. I can make the best of this moment.
Absolutely. What are some tools? What are some tools that you've learned in your field and even in your own life that we can talk about in how people can push through? Because I know that for me that was a huge obstacle, because I always believed that I couldn't push through. I reached my limit, and then the problem is I accepted that as a reality. I accepted. I remember telling my wife many times, on my tombstone is going to be, there was so much out there, but all he had was his limits. Because I felt trapped by my limits. And I think sometimes when circumstances turn and situations turn upside down and all of a sudden we don't know what to do, we feel like we're trapped. We feel like we have no other options and this is where our life's going to be. But what are some tools that we can talk about that can get us off the couch? I was working on a message on Sunday, and I'm going through David and how if David would have just stayed being a shepherd and content there, even though he was anointed king, he wasn't king at that time, but he went out and expanded his borders, and as he expanded his borders or his sphere, he got exposed to several things, and it was during those exposures that set the stage for other things. But if he would have just stayed there, he would have never heard Goliath's cry. He would have never seen what the armies of Israel was doing. If he would have just stayed in his little world and not pushing through maybe things that were unfamiliar to him, he gained some things, and all of a sudden, as he stepped out, God showed up in areas in his life that all of a sudden were mountains to him now became opportunities.
Right.
And his framework was shaped by pushing through. And I think, I don't know about you know, through your experiences either, I think that initial pushing through is a huge step for people. It was a huge step for me, and there's I even look back in my life, and there is still areas that I've pushed through here. Well, why can't I push through here? You know, it's you know. So what are some tools we can talk about that can help our listeners go, that I can grab hold to, if that I want to start applying, then I want to, so they start looking at these obstacles, these walls, or these crisis points in life not as something that threatens them, but provides an opportunity for them. What are some tools we can talk about?
Well, I think one of the most important things to become aware of is mindsets. Okay, because we have an emotion. It's not really the emotion that is troubling us, like fear, anxiety, or worry, or you know, whatever. It's the thought that we've attached to that emotion.
Oh yes.
Right?
Oh,
so
yes.
like if I you know, let's say for instance this experience here, you know, you said to me, Geri, let's have this table talk. And I'm like, oh, you know, I'm nervous. Like, you know, what are people going to say? What if I say the wrong thing? You know, what if I don't look good? Whatever that might be. But listen to me. I just had a whole bunch of thoughts. So I felt nervous, but I attached, you're going to fail. You're going to embarrass yourself. You're going to say something you wish you hadn't said.
Why do we do that? Why is it always negative?
I think it's the human nature, which is a sinful nature. If we could imagine that we are all like a computer with a virus program in it that wants to keep overtaking the system.
Yes.
And I think that is the sinful nature in us. Every human being is naturally negative.
Yep.
Okay? And it naturally, we want to attach to an emotion a negative voice. So I think that what we have to do is recognize there are negative voices going off in our head, but then decide who has the final word. Okay? So you mentioned David, all right? So here's David. He's already been taught that he's a runt, that he's not a good fighter, that the only thing he's good for is caring for sheep. He's been basically marginalized or isolated to the worst possible, but he didn't let that mindset get a hold of him. right? So, when he was called to deliver food
I want a
to
piece of paper here.
when he was called to deliver food to his brothers, okay, it was unfamiliar to him. He's not trained for war. He's going to a battlefield.
And when you read that, he asks tons of questions. In fact, his brothers say, "What are you asking these questions for? Get out of here, you runt. Go back to what you're doing."
Right. Nobody
it was
expected
total
him.
exposure to something new. So he was asking the questions, yeah.
Right. But you know that I believe, now, there's many ways of looking at that story. But one of the ways to look at that story is to realize that all that time he spent alone with God became bigger and bigger and bigger. He was the only companion he had. So the more he came to know God, worship God, and then in times of crisis, like when the lion came or the bear came, cry out to God for help. God became so big.
Yes.
Right? So, it's like we look in the mirror.
Absolutely.
And we're standing side by side. Here's me. Here's God. Let's put a physical form on God, right? And so I'm looking in the mirror and I see me and my size. And then I look at the reflection in the mirror of God beside me. How big is he? Right?
Yeah.
How big is he compared to me? You see, we cannot trust both God and man.
No.
We cannot trust ourselves and God all at the same kind of dimension. We have to decide who's bigger, who is the greater influence, who speaks the bigger truth, who has, the power, the authority to speak in my life. So David, when he looked in the mirror, right? Mm-hmm. He didn't have mirrors back then, I don't think, or in the lake or whatever he looked at, and he saw the reflection. What he saw is God's reflection was bigger than his. So when he went to battle, I don't think he was in denial about his size, his lack of training, any of that. I don't think that he was pretending to be something he wasn't.
No, absolutely not. No.
What he sensed was God was with him.
Yeah.
God had already promised to be with Israel. God had already promised to cause them to win in battle. So David saw God bigger than him. And he saw God bigger than all of the armies.
That I just want to make a point there, because that is so good. Whatever's biggest in our life is going to have the greatest influence.
Right.
So when we see our limitations as the biggest, then what we know is inside of us. If we see our crisis as bigger, if we see our insecurity as bigger, if we see the crisis in front of us as bigger, it will always have the greatest influence. And I love you brought that point up, because I think we know it, but it doesn't register because that's our default.
Right.
This is just so much bigger. We took a trip to Arizona a few years back. We took a car down, and we just crossed the border and started driving. We weren't even close to Williston at this point. And all of a sudden, the check engine light came on. And it's a new car. We hadn't had it very long. And then I noticed that when it would start climbing a little bit, it would resist. And it was like, we have 2,400 kilometers to drive, and we're not even in 100 kilometers, and now all of a sudden the car is responding that way, and immediately fear came. All of a sudden, we're not going to get there. We're going to be on the side of the road. I'm in a foreign country, and I don't know anybody. All these things are whirling in my mind, and we bought a book called about cognitive thinking.
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yes, there we go. That's it.
CBT is the
yes,
short term.
Absolutely. And so I said, get that book out, and we started going through the questions and how we answer and how we look and how we view, and so we started working through that, because that was the dominant thought in my mind. It was, we're going to be stranded. I don't know what to do, and to make matters worse, it was almost like an avalanche started happening. And so we had this issue. So I made a phone call to a dealership in Williston. They said they couldn't look at our car. There was nothing they could do about it. So that was a hole. And so finally we found a garage about 2 hours away that said, we'll look at it if you can bring it in here. I've worked on those vehicles before. And so, but it was 2 hours away. while we're driving, and now we were getting used to whenever it worked hard, it did that. So I was kind of, okay, nothing's stopping yet. And we got past Williston about a half an hour, 45 minutes, and all of a sudden my steering started going funny. And I thought, this feels like a flat tire. So I pulled over, and sure enough, my front tire was flat as a J.
Oh, wow.
And then I thought, right away, the most dominant thought is what influences us. Okay, now the engine is having problems, and now am I going to have a spare tire? And is the wrench going to work? All these things were so huge.
Right.
And it was compounding because are we going to get to the destination we need to get it fixed? Now the tire. And then I stopped myself. I was on the side of the road, and it was getting cloudy like it was going to rain. And I thought, sure enough, it's going to probably rain now too. All these negative things were just flooding a person's mind. All of a sudden, it was like I told Helen, I said, we're going to start looking at what is going our way, because we got to make these things smaller. And so I opened up the trunk, and usually there's we call it a donut, one of these limp, but it wasn't. It was an actual tire.
Wow.
And it was full of air. And so I started counting those things as, look at what's working, and jacked up the car. I wasn't even frustrated cars were driving by. I thought, there's nothing they can do. I just have to put on the tire. Right. I can't wait. And so I put it on, tightened it up, and I began to count the things that were working in my favor. There was air in the tire. It wasn't just one of these little 50-kilometer type tires you can drive on. And we made it to the repair shop, and they were able to look after that. Now, other things happened down the road, but I already was purposing to shape my mind, how big am I going to allow these things to happen? And as I was going through that workbook, it was guiding me through that.
Yeah.
And Helen was writing down while I was driving, okay, what's your motion right now? This is my motion. This is what I'm feeling. How big it is. And then, okay, it'll ask a question like, is this always happen to you, or how can you view this situation different? And so then we started looking. I started physically, we were talking of pushing through, tools to push through.
Right.
I began to speak what was working. Hey, we got to the repair shop, and they could fix it. And it wasn't $700. It was a few $100s. And you know, I got them to look at the tire. Said, there's nothing wrong with that tire. Wait till you get to your destination and then buy some new ones or whatever. So I was beginning to look at what was working for me rather than what was not working.
Right.
And then what happened, I noticed all of a sudden the peace started coming, because the situation wasn't like this. Now the situation was like this because the truth was bigger.
Right.
And as I recognized that, when the next thing happened a day or two later, we ran into a snowstorm, and then the windshield wipers wasn't working properly. They were going, but they were not clearing. Mm-hmm. And I could see myself immediately wanting to go, another problem.
Right.
Although they're small, but when you have a system of things going wrong, it just right?
Well, we see the system too.
Yes, we do.
Part of the problem with our thinking is there are patterns of thinking that will lead us into negativity and stop us. And, you know, many times people say, if I had no bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Nothing good ever happens to me.
I've said
you know, every time I think something good's going to happen, then this happens. And so those words begin to define their outlook. It's almost like we put on a pair of glasses that are tinted and change the color of everything. That's why the Bible is very clear that the battle of our life is not fought in our circumstances, it's fought in our mind. We have to literally take captive. We're in a battle, so we take captive thoughts that disagree with what God's promises are in our life, right? And we come to agree in God's promises. But you know, back, Jeff, to this whole thing of who's bigger. Okay, if I believe that I am the biggest thing in my life, that it's up to me, it's up to, you know, whether I'm a positive thinker only, or whether I'm have the right attitude, or whether I read the right books, or whether I get the right knowledge. Everything's up to me, okay? So in a way, I'm my own God, I'm my own success. You know, it's up to me. I find that people are more depressed. Because after a while, this is hard work.
Absolutely,
This
it
is
is.
exhausting, right? God doesn't ever want us to work that hard. It isn't up to us, it's up to him.
Yeah.
And it's like he wants us to put our hands always as children into the hands of the Father, to see ourselves actually smaller, not bigger, right? All the
Yep.
word tells you need to see yourself for who you are. That's good if it's in agreement with God.
Yeah.
It's not good if we think that healthy self-worth and healthy self-esteem is suddenly going to make me into a perfect godlike person
Yeah.
that's going to accomplish great things.
Yeah.
No, I would rather be honest. I would rather be honest and say, I'm struggling right now.
Yes.
I'm overwhelmed right now, but God, I put myself in your hands, in your keeping, and your truth.
Yes,
So
yes.
what is God's truth? It's for good and not for evil, right? God's truth is, I have plans for you. They're for good and not for evil. So back to what you were talking about, Jeff, everything that God has for us is good.
Yes.
You know, Philippians teaches us that whatever things are good, honest, of good report,
Yeah.
if there's something good you can see in them, something good you can champion,
Yes,
something good
yes.
you can celebrate, think on these things.
Yeah.
Well, people say, oh, that's just living in denial. No, that is truth.
Yes.
Because there is good all the way around us. There's good in our nation.
Yes.
There's good in our city.
Absolutely.
There's good in my personal life. You know, like I was just thinking the other day as I was walking, I frequently visit the Philippines, and I'm very aware of how many thousands of people make their living as street vendors, right? They stop you as you're at a stoplight selling you things through the window all the way along the road. Everywhere you go are street vendors. They make their living by cooking, by, you know, selling small things to you. Right now, Manila's shut down. And I couldn't help thinking, where are all these people and how are they coping? There's no health plan. There's no government handout. They're in poverty. You know, and we look at our situation sometimes during COVID and we get very negative about it, right?
Yeah, that's
but
right.
there's
Yeah.
so much good. Like, we're provided for. We have a government that's trying to help us out. You know, we have food on our table, a roof over our head, right? There is so much good,
Yeah.
right? It's all in mindsets.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that is the biggest obstacle I think we have is our mindset. I know for me it has been the biggest
Yes.
obstacle, but I've also seen when I've started pushing through, changing my mindset, seeing God's truth and his presence bigger than my circumstances, then I find hope, then I find peace, then I thought, okay, you know what, we're going to get through it.
Yes.
I remember we went in 2008, Helen and I went through a major financial crisis. We lost everything. Our business didn't go. It was a big crash of '08. And I remember feeling hopeless and empty and failed and all kinds of stuff. And I remember pacing the floor day in and day out. Sometimes I didn't sleep till 5 o'clock in the morning because I was carrying such heavy load of failure.
Yes.
You screwed up, you made bad decisions, and really it wasn't bad decisions, it was the circumstances and the business I had started that weren't meshing with the crash, what was happening. And so I felt hopeless. And that was something that I reminded myself weeks. And I remember phoning my dad one time, and I was starting to have chest pains. And I said, I don't know, I feel I got chest pains. And my dad says, you know what? You're gonna have to navigate through this. It's gonna harm you physically and with your health. And then again, I came to that point where am I going to push through, or am I just going to let this overrun me? And I remember I was in our living room in our home that we were renting, and we were moving out into an apartment because we couldn't afford to live there anymore. And I remember sitting there and seeing the Bible on the counter table, and I looking at it and saying, God, that doesn't work. And it was almost like he was saying to me, have you really put it to work? Have you really allowed it to do what it's supposed to? You're expecting it just to happen. Are you willing to sacrifice and push through and start changing how you see things? And I remember it was a distinct point in my life where I said, I never have, but I'm going to give it a shot. It was my way of saying I'm willing to step into something that's unfamiliar to me and beginning to allow your promises to make a bigger influence on my circumstances. And I think, Geri, that was a turning point. It was no longer, it wasn't it. It was a turning point where for the first time I took responsibility for my own thinking.
Right.
And that was big for me because it was easy to blame everybody else. Oh, if it wasn't this, it wasn't this, it wasn't this. But when I took responsibility for my own thinking,
right,
I can change it because I believed I never could. This was it. That was all there was. I had to make the best of it or sink with the rest of them.
Right.
It was such a clear pinnacle point in my life when I looked at the Bible and said, I'm going to give it a shot. I'd been a Christian for years. I'd grown up in the church.
Right.
But something switched in here. Have I really allowed it to be the influence? Mm-hmm. And I remember to this day, and that was the start of me pushing through some of my, because there's nothing I could do. And sometimes that's a very uncomfortable spot to be, but it's significant in seeing yourself as I'm going to push through. And that was the starting point where I began to change, where I just began to change, that it was possible to change how I think.
Right.
And I think that was the gate that opened up from then on, instilling how important our mindsets are, pushing through, not being afraid of the unfamiliar, not being afraid of the unknown, but stepping into it with courage, understanding I have fears, admitting I have fears. I'm afraid because I've never been here before, but it's okay because there's something that's going to shape me to be who I believe that was the starting point.
Right. You know, I think there's some common things we do in our mind, in our thinking, that often create problems for us. One is we do tend to catastrophize. So there's something going on in my life that, okay, at the time feels big for us, but really, in the whole scheme of events, is relatively small. Mm-hmm. You know, so many people go through bankruptcy. Yep. Many people go through health crises. Yep. You know, we go through these circumstances in life. I think sometimes as Americans, we believe that life shouldn't involve suffering. That if suffering comes to us, that either I've done something ultimately bad, like where your mind went with your difficulties, or somebody's out to get me. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Been there too.
You know?
Been there too.
And most of the time, the somebody that's out to get me is God. He's making me suffer because there's something he wants to teach me. And so we have this mindset that if God was really, really cared for me, or really loved me, bad things wouldn't happen to me. And if bad things happen, he caused them. Yeah. Okay, none of that is true. I think bad things happen in this world because we live in a fallen world, because we're all not grown up yet, because we learn by our mistakes. Yeah. You know, all of that's true. Humanity, a fallen world, all of those things. So God isn't, you know, sitting there assigning negative things on all of us. But when negative things come, we have this tendency to say, well, that's what always happens to me. Like I said earlier, it doesn't seem to matter what I do, it's never good enough. Another thing we do is we predict negative outcomes. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, why do I even try? Because nothing good's going to work out.
I'm not going to try because I'm going to fail anyway.
Yeah, I'm going to fail anyway. So we predict negative outcomes. We tend to be fortune tellers and predict that if I try it, people will say this, do this, act in this way. So, and it's always negative, right? Yeah. And so we get caught up, or we live entirely out of our feelings. So because today I woke up and I feel down and discouraged, well, today's going to be a bad day because that's how I'm feeling today, right? So we let our feelings dictate our reality. All of those things are thinking, okay? But what we don't see is that every negative circumstance is an opportunity for us to discover a dimension of God and put our hands into the kingdom, into the hands of God, and see some powerful things happen. I remember quite a few years ago, I had a very good friend die. The couple was a very good friend of my husband and I, and he died suddenly at the age of 40, and the cause of death unknown. And so, I heard about it, and we were all grieving, and I was about to go to the house where the widow was. She's a good friend of mine. And as I was driving there, I was very young at the time. I didn't even have kids yet. And I thought, what am I going to say to her that could help her or encourage her? Because I've never experienced death. I've never experienced a loss. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. What am I going to say?
Yeah.
And the Lord spoke to me so clearly that day and said to me, tell her I have given her an invitation. And I went, what? Tell her I have given her an invitation. Very few people have been invited in to be husbanded by God. Now that she has no husband, I want to husband her. And this is an invitation to an awesome experience. Years later, when my own husband left me and I was all alone, God brought those words back to me. I can either sit, feel sorry for myself, remind myself that now, I'm not married anymore. All my friends are married. My life's over, like it sucks. Right? Or I can say, God, you have issued an invitation where you now, because I have no physical husband, have the opportunity to come and husband me. And what would that be like to be husbanded by God, right? And that illustration, I think, tells that in every dimension of our life where we feel inadequate is an opportunity to venture into a relationship with God where He believes you can succeed.
Yes.
He believes
Absolutely.
You can overcome. He believes you can have joy, health, right? Even prosperity, because He is now going to make up for the gap that we have created through our humanity.
I hearing that, I love to hear people's journeys and stories because it's a window into their process.
Right.
And I don't think we do that enough. We don't, because we oftentimes we want to hide behind these masks because we don't want to have the perception that we're not getting it or we're not pushing through.
Yes.
When we have discussions like this with other people in our homes or over coffee, what it does is it sparks hope, and that's the thing I want our listeners to understand, is that God, His presence sparks hope. It doesn't spark insecurity. It doesn't spark not have to work harder, not have to. It sparks hope.
Right.
Because He does believe in us. Even before we believed in ourselves, He's already. I remember one of the table talks we had is I had poker chips on the table, and each chip has its own value and has its own importance. And when you know the game of poker, which I don't really, but there's strategy involved, and there's chance and there's some risk and everything else. You could end up having a bad set and losing it all. And I remember saying that before we go to the table, God is all in. He's willing to risk it all on us.
Yeah.
So when we walk into a sit, and you mentioned that about a relationship, that is so key, because a relationship isn't a set of rules and regulations to follow. It's organic. It's something that is birthed and grows as you develop intimacy, and as you develop that relationship, it gives birth to new things, and things get bigger and brighter, and all of a sudden you see dimensions because it's alive. But when you go to the table and He's all in already, because He risked it all on us, because He values us. I like what Bill Johnson said one time, it's not so much Christ died for us because we were sinners. He died for us because to show us our value. And I love that, because I think many of us, I don't know if you struggle with that, valuing ourselves. God's all in. And not only does it spark hope, but gives us motivation to step in the unknown, to push through some of these things that seem to be bigger than what His truth and His promises are.
Jeff, I was visiting one of my grandsons, and I gave him a Lego set for Christmas, and just a small thing. I can't even remember what we were building. And so we dump out all the chips on the table, and he's there trying to build this. And, the instructions are there, but he's a pretty independent little thing, and he's going to try to figure it out. And,
without the instructions.
Yeah, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, let me help you, Cameron. No, it's okay, Grandma. It's okay, Grandma. And he's a very strong, personality and very independent. And he's wanting to figure it out himself. And I'm watching him put this stuff together, and he's getting it all wrong. And I know that down the road, you know how Lego is one piece builds on another piece.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
He's going to get very frustrated. And I'm saying, let me help you, Benjamin. Now, why do I want to help him? Because I think he's stupid? No, but because I recognize in his childishness, right?
Yep.
He doesn't always know how to read the instructions. He doesn't really have the full capacity to do this. And I want him to succeed, right? I want him to grow, to learn, but also to succeed. So it's not about me taking over his life, devaluing him, making him think he's stupid or feel stupid. It's about me helping him succeed.
Yep.
And it wasn't until, okay, Grandma, right?
Yep.
Help me out, that I showed him. I didn't necessarily take it away from him, but I showed him the instructions, and I said, Cameron, this piece first, then this piece. Right? But that's the relationship that God wants to have with us. He's not judging us because we struggle. No. He's not judging us for having strong emotions. He's not judging us for struggling even in our mindsets.
Yeah.
There's no judgment here. But he's sitting on the sidelines of our life, and he's saying, quit being so prideful. Quit being so strong-minded. I'm here to help you succeed. Right? Because I love you and I care for you. Let's do this together.
It's interesting when in the book of John, when Jesus talks about the Holy Spirit, he calls him something that's very significant. He calls the Holy Spirit our helper.
Yes.
And what amazes me about that, often when my mind goes to help, that means I'm inadequate.
Yes.
Or when I need help, I've failed.
Yes.
Or when I need help, I'm locked in a corner and I have no options. But I like how you put that, because he doesn't help us because we failed. He doesn't help us because we're inadequate. He doesn't help us because we have a problem. He helps us because he sees our potential and knows our limitations, and he's willing to compensate for that so that we can succeed.
Amen.
And one of the things that I've had to swallow in my life is pride. I'll figure it out on my own. I'll make it work. I've taught myself many things in life. I've taught me how to swim. I've taught myself to ski. I've taught myself all these things that were all self-taught because I was determined. I had the personality. I had all these things. But yet in it all, I learned some major hard lessons that I didn't have to learn if I simply asked for help.
Right.
Not because of weakness or failure, because I'm limited. I'm not going to have the full scope of stuff. And again, it points to our point where if we're going to push through, we have to recognize we can't do it on our own, that he's going to come alongside so that we live the full potential he's created us to be. And that gives me hope. That's all of a sudden my defenses are down. Whereas my defenses are up. No, I got. Yep. Now my defenses are down, and now, and this is the thing that I've learned, when my defenses are down, I become teachable.
Yes.
I'm not threatened. If I sit down with you and we're going to walk through a struggle that I have, if I don't feel threatened, if I feel like you have something to give me, and I'm okay with that, I'm teachable. I'm going to receive. I'm going to learn. Yes. I never thought of that. I'm going to apply that. And it's not necessary that you're better, but you have tools that you've learned that when you put those tools into my hands, then I learn. And now I can take those tools and put them in someone else's hand, where it's not, now I've arrived, now this, it's just showing tools from one person to the next person. And sometimes, and I agree with this very much, sometimes because our mindsets are so strong, sometimes we need professional help to work through that. It's not that this person can do it, that sometimes the skill sets require something, because our mind function, it's like a computer, and sometimes it's like you said, that virus, and sometimes it's just that tools, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, And now we can pass that knowledge on
it's
to
like
people.
a virus checker.
Yes, and we talked about this at the start about the importance of community and people involvement, and that's what it's all about. It's
Right.
organic.
Right.
And if we can just humble ourselves, admit, hey, I just need perspective. I need help. And sometimes it's not even major detailed stuff. Sometimes I've used this illustration before because it happens to be all the time. I have my keys in my hand and I'm looking for my keys.
Yeah.
I'm looking for my keys, and then, someone will say, what's in your hand? It's like, but we get so zoomed, so focused that our observation skills are and we don't see what's right in front of us. And I think oftentimes that help is that.
It's a great illustration.
Right? It just opens it up.
Yeah.
I used to be threatened by that. I thought, well, if I can't figure it, then I failed. That's not true.
No.
And that, again, is what we're talking about, pushing through our mindsets. It's huge, and that's one of the tools that we can use to help us push through the obstacle that's in front of us, is changing how we view what we see. It's not an obstacle, it's an opportunity. It's not a threat. It's a doorway into something new.
Jeff, when you study human development, we all seem to understand that children develop in stages. I learned to feed myself, then I learned to dress myself, then I learned to clean my room, then I learned to make friends on my own, I go to school, I ride a bus, I ride a bike, I drive a car. And we recognize that we are in the process of human development.
Yeah.
But there's something, I don't know why that is, but there's something about us where we think, you turn 18, you're an adult now, I'm not in human development anymore.
Right.
I've come to the conclusion that I'm always growing up.
Yes.
I mean, there's things now in my life, I've crossed that magic 6 number. There's things in my life that I've learned in the last couple of years that I'm like, why didn't I get this years ago? I'm always growing up. I'm always learning.
Yes.
Right? So I try, just to counter pride in my own life, to constantly see myself as the child in the Father's hand. And there's no shame in being childlike in my life, and recognize that I'm always growing up. And so then when I'm faced with an immaturity or I'm faced with an inadequacy, I'm like, well, that's just an area I need to grow in.
Yeah.
Right? And
and then you're not threatened because
Exactly.
you're teachable. That's okay. I've got to learn there. It's like writing an exam in school. It's like I'm going to fail. No.
Right.
And it's just an aspect of learning. I'm learning Greek, and there's a few spots where I'm locked. I'm just like, I have to build on this concept, but I don't see the concept. For years, I used to be at a point where I can't learn that. But then I remind myself of what I've all learned already. I go through all the materials I already learned, and it's already in my mind. So here's a point where I'm going to learn this too.
Right.
This is not... So often I was always afraid of when the wall came up because I thought then it was impenetrable. I couldn't climb it. But then I realized, no, I've climbed them before. I want to climb this one too.
Right.
And so then my mindset changes. No, I'm going to learn that. It's just I have to stop here and reassess and readjust, and I'm going to learn.
Right.
And where before I would close the book and say I'm done. Just school's not my thing, right? And I think a lot of us stay stuck that way. And I just want to speak hope into your life. You don't have to stay stuck that way.
Amen.
Your opportunities are there for you to discover and grow and learn. And the environment, God creates environment around us to succeed and do well, because that's what He believes in us, to succeed and well. So whatever we face, whatever we're looking in front of us, is the opportunity. And we'll learn some tools. Absolutely, we got to learn some tools.
Yes.
And when we learn those tools, then it's not a problem anymore. It's we keep on learning, keep on growing. Is there anything that you want to add to what we've been saying? We talked about our mindsets and how important our mindsets are in pushing through our fears and inadequacies, and how big we see God opposed to how big we see our problem or our circumstances. Is there anything there that's maybe ringing in your heart that you would like to add to some of these tools?
Well, the only thought I kind of want to leave with, Jeff, is what you just finished saying. I just want to really build on that.
Okay, let's do
and
that.
that is
Absolutely.
this concept of hope. Okay? Just recently, I kind of went through a downer myself, and a bit of a depression, feeling just like, I don't know, waking up in the morning, things were dark. And I began to seek the Lord to say, what's going on here? Like, why can't I pull myself up? And finally, I did find an answer, and the answer was, you've lost hope. And I thought, well, what does that really mean? And I realized that in the simplest form, the definition of hope is I believe something good's going to happen. As long as I anticipate nothing good's going to happen, or what will happen won't be good, I have no hope. Yeah. And when you have no hope, you're going to be depressed.
Absolutely.
It's either hope or not hope.
Yep.
Like there's no halfway in the middle. And I really believe that hope is the most powerful thing that we have to grab onto.
Yes.
And we have to continue. Hope in our marriage. Hope for raising our children.
Yep.
Hope in our finances. Hope in our community. Hope in our future as a nation. Hope, right?
Yes.
We have to literally, doggedly come into agreement with the Word of God, who always has hope for us, always has hope for His kingdom, always has hope for our nation, right? God sees something good.
Yes.
Right? He sees something good. People say, is what's happening in the world right now God punishing us? No. That is not the nature of God.
No.
Right? God always has hope for us if we come into partnership with Him. Right?
Yep.
And I just feel today, if there's one thing I want to address, and if you're listening today and you're discouraged and you're struggling with depression, there's no judgment here.
No.
But I want to encourage you, grab a hold of hope. Start to believe again there is good ahead. There is a good future for you.
Absolutely.
There is something positive coming down the pipe. And you're going to push towards that. You're going to do everything in your power to facilitate that. But when everything's said and done, God is on your side.
That's right.
And He has good things for you.
Absolutely. I just, I don't know what to say. That's phenomenal. Absolutely. And I think the Bible talks about hope does not disappoint.
Yes.
And what we hope in is so critical. And again, talking about the readjustment and realignment to the bigger reality than what we see. And I love that you put it that way, because I too, when I lose hope, everything else starts to spiral. And then I see what overwhelms me the most is what I'll always see.
Right.
And I have to learn to stop myself when I start going down that trend.
Yeah.
I have to learn to stop myself. And it's like sometimes I've used excuse, well, I can't. It just keeps. No, it can. And sometimes understanding that it can gives hope. No, I don't have to keep going down this road. It's like sitting on the side of the road going, what next is going to happen now? No, I'm going to start recognizing what is happening. And that sparks hope. Hope, like you say, is a fuel. It's energy. It's a restness that happens. And so, we want to leave you with that hope. And your circumstances never define who you are. The situation you're in don't define who you are. And God is able to come alongside when we allow Him to. Because He doesn't force Himself on us. When we come alongside us and we invite Him into that, I like using the phrase, inviting Him into our space.
Right.
Because when we're in the context, that's our space. And sometimes we don't want to hear from people. We guard ourselves. That's our space. But we invite God into that space and allow Him to overwhelm the circumstances.
Yes, bigger.
All of a sudden, what we're going through seems to be smaller and smaller. And it's important, I think, and you would agree, that it's important to have the right people around us at times when we are in crisis, because what people speak into our life can affirm the hope or it can take away the hope.
Right.
And I remember just sitting down and talking to somebody, all I hear is negative. We've got to learn to shut that off and have the right people in our life that spur us into that hope and that. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been a real blessing and a privilege. And I just want to tell you, too, that are watching and listening, if you find value in any of what's been said, we would encourage you, hit the share button, because we would love this for others to experience and listen to this. And by you sharing, it gives other people the opportunity to interact with what we've been talking about, and at the end of the day, spark hope in their circumstances and the situation. And love to connect with us. Send us a message if there's something specific that maybe is working through in your life that we can direct you to Geri. Again, we're going to have the website up, and she would love to connect with you too, because we're all in this thing to grow and to learn. And I love that emphasis that we've been having here. So I want to say thank you for joining us, and we just wish you have a great week, and stay tuned. Wednesday we keep promoting some new material, new stuff, and thank you for taking the time to join us, whether you're watching this live or you're watching this in the comfort of your own circumstances, in your car or wherever you are. I just want to personally thank you for taking the time to invest and listen and participate. So thank you very much, and bless you. Appreciate having you. Bye-bye.